All right. As people start joining in, we'll get going. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on what part of the world you are joining us from. I'm your host, Alex Faust, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Bob Glazer. And I speak about him all the time. I share his Friday Forward all the time. But if you're not familiar with Bob, he's the founder and chairman of the board of Acceleration Partners, the premier global partner marketing agency that's won over 30 awards for its world-class company culture, which is made up of a remote workforce of over 270 people. He's the author of Friday Forward, one of my favorite newsletters, which is an inspirational newsletter that reaches over 200,000 readers worldwide every week, and the #1 Wall Street Journal best-selling author for several books, including Elevate, Friday Forward, and his newest, which is How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace. He's also a global keynote speaker who has spoken on the TEDx stage and host of the popular Elevate podcast. And above all else, he's passionate about sharing ideas that will help people and organizations elevate their performance and reach their full potential. In December, Bob passed the torch and stepped away as CEO of Acceleration Partners and is now in his new position as chairman of the board. And I'm excited to kind of hit on a brand new but very important topic for our community, which is this idea of succession, how, when, who to pass the torch to. And we're going to cover all of that today. So Bob, welcome back to Conversations at the Edge. And where are you calling in from today?
Thanks, Alex. I'm right outside of Boston, a town called Needham, Massachusetts.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here. And for the folks who are here live in the Zoom, please feel free to type in your questions. The last 10 minutes we'll have for you. So any of your succession questions, not the HBO show, but about passing the torch in your business, feel free to type them into the chat. So, Bob, first, congrats on the transition, and would love to kind of hear how your last 2 months have been.
They've been busy. I have some friends calling, asking, how the early bird special is and all that stuff. It's the beginning of the year, so there's been a lot going on actually with travel starting. But yeah, I think it's gone exactly how we expected it to go. One of the things on this is that I think this is one of the things that we as an organization are good at, and I'm sort of good at. A core value of mine is sort of long-term orientation, and this was something that Matt and I had worked on for almost 2 years. And I think interestingly, the leadership team knew about it for most of that time. When we announced it to the company, it sort of became clear that all the changes that needed to be made actually had already been made over the last 12 months, like all of the small things that we had sort of done to put in that direction. So it really wasn't a big change for the organization. I mean, there's always the psychological value of it, but again, it was talking about taking the long view. It was sort of a 2-year process all in.
And so, I mean, what made you decide that you wanted to make this change? How did you know that it was your time to kind of step away and let somebody else take the reins?
Yeah, what's interesting is a couple things. One, employees are always sort of looking to learn and grow and do something else. And, I had been in this role for almost 15 years. And I think that applies to the CEO as well. But I had been doing this role at AP. I had started writing and becoming passionate about things outside of work too. And, so for years I had done both of those. And, it was my company. I could just see that was not going to be sustainable. I also saw what are we trying to build? What does the organization need? And what will the role of the CEO read? And as I was going through that, I also read Patrick Lencioni's book, The Motive, which just sort of nails this whole concept on the head. I think it was pretty validating. And so we also brought on some investors too. And so when it was just my company, I could spend the time how I want. I didn't really have to justify it. It also just felt fairer to be clear about, the role at AP versus the stuff that I was doing out of AP. So I looked at that and I said, look, our plans to build $100 million company with our investors. Here's the role of the CEO. Very little of the management team reported to me anyway. I didn't want all the direct reports, and sort of looked and I said, most of this stuff is not the stuff that I really like to do. I like working on the strategy, the new products and services, culture, helping to train and build up our leaders. And, that's less and less of what the business each day. And, I was lucky to have a number two for almost 10 years who was our president. And it just, became clear that, that was a very natural fit for him and an opportunity for him. He deserved to be a CEO. He wanted to be a CEO, and I'd rather him be the CEO of Acceleration Partners than, selfishly than another company. So, 2 years ago, we were walking in London on a bridge and kind of talking about career stuff. And I was like, look, I want you to take over. I think this is the right decision for both of us, but there's a lot of things that you need to do and work on. And there's a lot of structural things that we want to do. But like I said, it was a little Kaiser Soze-esque in terms of, I think when we got there and people realized that, oh, all the management team doesn't report to Bob anymore. Oh, Matt's been running all the meetings. Oh, I think they sort of look back and realize, again, we had been slowly making all of the changes whereby at that point, there wasn't a lot to change.
That's great. We'll get into a little bit more in a bit about that transition and kind of how you did the pass off. But I'm curious, in the Friday Forward, when you announced to your larger community, you mentioned that, the role that you played as CEO of a 50-person company was much different than the role of CEO in a 270-person organization. So I'm curious if you could just tell us a little bit about, the difference between those two CEO roles and
Well, first of all, it was interesting. I did not even take the CEO role. I think I was managing director until we got to 100 people. And then we started to have managing directors in Europe and whatever. And it got a little confusing, who's who. I was reluctant. The role CEO means chief executive officer, right? So you are a leadership of a team of executives. If you're a 5-person company, you shouldn't have a CEO. You should have a president, right? It becomes an ego thing. If you are the head of sales, the head of marketing and whatever, unless you are, bipolar, you're not leading a whole team of people, not to make light of that, but I do think it becomes such an ego thing. So that was clear for me. And so at 50 people, the leader of a company is selling a lot of vision, a lot of ideas. I call it the R&D department is like a really big part of the company, right? At a 200-person company, keeping the trains on the tracks is really important. You have a lot of people and processes and things to manage. And the R&D department, Steve Jobs, in Apple's early days versus Tim Cook was heading a lot of that stuff, becomes smaller. And while it's important, because I think the ideal company has this sort of visionary and operator combo, someone who really likes to operate, someone who likes creating, I think their importance or just their relative weight, in terms of day-to-day changes. I'm not sure if Steve Jobs was alive today, if he'd want to be CEO of what Apple involves. He'd probably find, the shareholder meetings and the board meetings and a lot of that stuff, just not what he wanted to do. Now, he might designate all that to a president or COO. So I think a lot of founders, the title is sort of the reward. And I think they don't pick their head up at some point. I've seen plenty of them who really would be better off being the head of sales or the head of marketing because they don't want that responsibility. Your job is to lead an executive team. That is literally the job. It is actually not selling. There was a CEO of a partner company who we used to work with. He used to reach out to me all the time and ask me if I knew someone on LinkedIn. And I was like, look, you should be the head of sales at your company. This is not the role of a CEO, is hitting up someone for leads, every day. Again, I think that the CEO's job is really to manage this team and make that team better and spend most of the time coaching and leading and managing that team. And, at a certain size, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do.
Thank you for that. I'm curious, you mentioned there were some things that Matt needed to work on, the now CEO, over that 2-year span. So what were some of the things that you saw in Matt that you knew he was right to play role of CEO? And then what were some of the things that he needed to work on to kind of grow into the vision that you had for him?
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, I think every strength is a weakness, right? So some of the things were the things I just had to learn, as my role was elevated. Just I think I'm very authentic, like casual, say what's on my mind. As you start to become big company, like people take your word as gospel, and you just there's certain things you don't like, but you like to be politically, but that you can't joke about, or comments you can't make, things that you can do at 10 people that you just can't do at 100. So one of the things I think, and this has been a big transition from Matt. I mean, this is what makes Matt a great operator, is that he is on the details. His projections are always to the 1%. A lot of the debates that we always had around like going after a big plan was like, if he couldn't figure out the math of how it all lined up, like, then he wouldn't be as comfortable with it. So I think some of it was just the gravitas as a leader, your executive presence. One of the things that I had to learn, again, I talked with him about, is this kind of the Disney concept of like, you are always on stage. Like when you're in your character as a leader of the company, you are always on stage. People are taking every word you say, they're misconstruing it. So I think your body language, the types of comments you say, how you get, frustrated with people, that sort of stuff, like it really changes as your role elevates. I think that was one big bucket. And then the other bucket was, being able to create a more of a set of vision, something that's a little messy, something that doesn't have a clear plan to it, because operators like, the clarity. And I think, Matt's really shifted in terms of embracing plans and goal settings and understanding that like, sometimes you got to put a stake in the ground and just hold people accountable to getting there without exactly knowing how you're going to get there. So those were two of the areas. But yeah, that on stage one is really hard for people. It's tough. You feel like there's this boundary between being inauthentic, but then also realizing like that's part of the role. That's the Disney thing. I equate it to Disney. Like their rule is like, when you are in character, you're in character, and you never break that until you jump off the stage. And I think obviously if you're having beers with your executive team and something like that, it's a little different. But when you're on that company stage, I think you really need to be conscious of that and in that character.
And the 2 years that, you guys made that transition, do you think that's standard? Or, can you tell us a little bit, like how long do you recommend that a CEO who wants to transition should kind of go through a process?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where they are, where the person is. I think we knew we were going to go through this investment process, and we thought we didn't want to have a lot of change in that. I think that sort of scares people. We also didn't want people to think that the investors had actually, pushed that on us. In fact, it was the opposite. We went to our investors, the prospective investors, that this is the plan. And frankly, they were kind of excited about it. I think the wild card is always like, well, what's the founder? Are they going to want to hang around? Are they going to get bored? So they liked having a sort of, number two in waiting who was going to stand up. But I think for us that was the right period of time, particularly to shift the reporting relationships, to make some structural changes, to get people used to Matt leaning in. Also, just with COVID, happening and just all the distractions of a year, it just felt like we needed it. So we were conscious around, again, I think, not wanting it to be too close to, when we brought on investors. But again, just my experience is people react pretty poorly to change, even though they want it. And then just over time, people see that things are naturally evolving and they just become more used to it. So, we just try not to change too many things at once.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you speak a lot about it. You have a course on core values. You're very passionate about the role that core values play from a personal and a professional point of view. And I'm curious what, if any, role the core values of the organization, of yourself, kind of played a role in the decision-making process.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I forgot what I was going to say last time, which was in terms of the why Matt. Matt has just always exemplified our core values. So to me, that was more of the sort of why. He's always been across the board on the core values. But yeah, they definitely play a part when you think about sort of owning our core values are own it, excel and improve, and embrace relationships. So, I had to sort of own it. I had to, decide, to lean in and bring someone else in, and then think about what is the best thing for the organization and what helps us get better. So yeah, to me, good core values are an ultimate decision-making guide that can tell you sort of, what to do. So I think if you think about the culmination of that choice, certainly involves several of our company core values. And because one of the things we always tell our employees, I'm like, if you don't improve, I'm not sure you can remain excellent, right? I might have been an excellent or a good CEO under certain conditions, but maybe I was about to not be one under different conditions as things changed.
Thank you for that. I'm curious, this is, I guess, a two-part question. I want to first focus on your decision to say, Matt, I want you to take over, and then when you guys were working together to actually make that transition. But the question is, like, who else did you confide in, and how did you talk through these ideas in your mind when you were thinking, like, I need to step into a new space for my growth and for Acceleration Partners growth?
I think for the first 6 months, it was just he and I and our coaches. It was still theoretical. I think it was then, 6 months in, we at one of our strategic offsites sort of brought that to the leadership team and said, this is the plan. And, like everything, there was a lot of not shock, but concern, whatever. And then just over time, everyone was like, oh, this became the plan. And as we hired new people, and as an organization, again, they reported to Matt, they didn't report to me. So it gave us some time. Like, one of the dynamics that we had was we had sales reporting to Matt, marketing reporting to me, since I'm sort of a marketing DNA person. And that just created, sales and marketing always have some natural friction. And right. So that just created some issues, because when there was a problem, it would filter up to these two places. And then there's two of us, and we're sort of defending our fiefdom, and really you want one judge, over that dynamic. And so when we were hiring a new marketing lead, again, we made the conscious decision to shift that to Matt. So again, that just changed automatically, because when our new marketing person started earlier this year, then sales and marketing reported directly to Matt. She never reported to me. So there was no shift, right? So at that point, and we had structured the rest of our business into global structure. So that actually meant that one of the managing director of the UK who was switching into a global role. So then that naturally didn't report to me. So it just moved all the things around. It was interesting, the people who reported to Matt never thought twice about it, like, unless it wasn't any. Just if they reported to me, then it was something different versus just all they knew. Matt's also much better manager than I am.
It's nice of you to say about Matt.
Most founders and entrepreneurs are not good. There's a difference between leading and coaching and managing, right? Yeah. And wanting to do the difficult stuff. I also think a lot of founders don't want to be the bad news people. And that's, I feel like it's my job to be the, optimistic, whatever. So I'm probably not as good at holding people accountable and delivering the bad news and, dealing with that side. That's what operators, learn how to do and get good at.
Yeah, that's good self-awareness. I'm sure what made you two a great team. So I'm curious, obviously you mentioned coaches, but if there are folks here who are interested in succession, are there books or advisors or people that you would recommend they go to for kind of guidance in figuring this out for themselves?
It's interesting. I didn't read anything on this. Probably one of the areas. I did read a lot of things on exiting your business or sort of, long-term goals. And this is where I just come back to the Stephen Covey sort of, start with the end in mind. So, as I worked backwards from 10 and 5 years, I thought about what would have to happen for me to be, where I wanted to be, and then kind of diving down those routes. Again, I'm really lucky. I just think it was a situation over 10 years of grooming a number two who ran the business, who was very natural. I think I can't think of any specific resource on succession. But I will say that I think in the EOS sort of traction visionary model, if you're using that, the more that you have your operator running 90% of the business on a day-to-day basis, it just makes something like this a lot simpler, because you already have those systems and processes in place.
Yeah, that's very important. And I'm curious, about the handoff and the time? 2 years, was it like one responsibility at a time? How did you kind of did you build the plan together? Can you talk to us a little bit, like, and maybe advise the community on how to kind of build out that plan?
One of the things our coaches worked with us over the years, and I think whether it's Tractions or Gazelles or otherwise, is these future org charts, right? So we always had these 1, 2, and 3 org charts of where is it going to be, and then what needs to sort of migrate to get there. So I think that some of it, like, it could have been a shorter time frame. Again, some of it was around COVID and going to market for investment, and then all the stuff afterwards, and doing 2 acquisitions right away, and just trying to like get to a stable place. But we didn't have sort of like a playbook. I think we just defined the end state. So the end state would be, that Matt was going to slowly take over more of the company communications, more of the calls, stand in, more of the things that they went to me. Actually, bringing on investors was another big shift point, because before that, people would just come to me like, what's our budget this year? What do we want to spend? Do we want to take this risk? And now we had a board and we had sort of a team. And so we were able to set that. And so it actually became more natural to just go to Matt about that stuff, because those weren't my unilateral decisions anymore, which was something that I wanted. But I think it was that org chart and just starting to replace and move stuff around with the strategy of everything moving into him. Even my EA started to shift to support him. Someone who worked for me like became sort of chief of staff. So it was this slow sort of movement on the org chart. Also, we built out the whole team. So that was the other thing too. So part of it for Matt was he had to get out of stuff. He was still in contracts. We hired someone to answer contracts. He still was doing a lot of coaching and mentoring that was unscalable because he was managing all of these groups. So we found someone who could help run and manage these sort of coaching forums that he put together. So, I had to, he's kind of like a carry your own bags person. I mean, I am too, but he's even worse in terms of like schedule my own meetings and all this stuff. And I was like, look, you need to start thinking about being the CEO of a $50 or $100 million company, and you need an EA to schedule your meetings, and you need someone else to do that. You have to start treating your time like it's great. I was like, you're the only person I would ever tell to be more fancy. Like take the direct flight. Don't take the indirect flight. Like, you kind of have to put your time value up on a pedestal a little higher. This is not what you'd normally be encouraging someone to do, but again, in that case, I thought it was important. And like, look, what is an hour of your time worth as the CEO of this organization? So don't be the only one on a chain there's 3 EAs trying to book a meeting, and that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's great. I think focusing on that future org chart really kind of probably shifts the perspective a little bit, so you have a roadmap, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and one of the key tenets is you build the blocks that they need to be for the strategy, and then you put the names. You don't build it based on the names. And I think you say, well, here's where we need to be, and here's how it could shift. But yeah, the other biggest thing is that we rounded out our exec team. Over those 2 years, we brought in a CFO. We brought in a head of marketing, those were really key missing pieces. And that was really, again, it became Matt's team. They reported to him. And so that was a really easy transition.
Thank you. And a reminder to the folks who are here, if you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A, and I will ask them to Bob. I'm curious, if there was a time where you were wavering, like, am I doing the right thing? Is this really what's best for me and what's best for the business? Did that ever happen to you?
I didn't consciously waver, but I definitely had some stomach issues. Just a long year anyway. Like I think sometimes it's hard to know you're going towards something and you're not there yet. I think I worried that I was going to waver, but I had thought about this for a long time, and there was like 0 second there was any second thought or anything about it when the time actually came. But I thought there might be more of, and maybe there was some anxiety sort of below the surface, but I think by the time, because it was so long, by the time I'm somewhere when I know what we're doing, like I want to get there. Like I actually think it was like, all right, we've been doing this forever. Like it's time to actually, have us get there.
Anything you would have done differently, knowing what you know now?
No, I think like anything probably could have done it a little sooner. I think we were, again, conscious of certain timetables and other things going on. But yeah, it might have even been able to be a little bit faster. But in the context of what was going on in the world and all the change and chaos, like I think it worked out okay.
That's great. What kind of advice would you have for other founders, CEOs, owners who would like to find a successor?
First, most are not lovers of operations. So I'm super in on the traction integrator visionary concept. And I would make sure you have an integrator in your business. Like who is the person that, most of the founders are unless look, if your discipline is sales or marketing, like check your ego, think about what you like to do. What is the role that needs to be done by the leader of the organization? And what do you like to do? And are those one and the same? Because I actually love when you find that someone's the founder and they list their card as like chief bottle washer or something. Like I find those people like a ton of humility of like, even though it's their company, they don't even let you know that, they're in charge. I'd read the motive. I think it's really powerful. And I would really look at, what do I like to do? What does the organization need? Kind of check your ego. And I think you might, find more satisfaction if you could carve out the role. And if that role is, and here's the thing, it might be what you love at 50 people. And then it might be a little different at 100. And then you might say, look, I want to take this company to 150, but man, I don't want to be managing a 10-person management team. But that's where the thing comes in. Like, I think I said this in one of my posts. Most founders and entrepreneurs were not A students, right? They didn't do great in school, didn't do great in the school system. They're just, being CEO is sort of this reward, of that's the A, that's the sort of reward of all their hard work and all that stuff. So I think it's very hard for people to give that up. But that's a real deep conversation with yourself around ego and what you want, and is ego getting in the way, and does that title really define you? Like, I think it also, big part of people, and I talk to some companies, we want to buy their company, and they're almost keeping the business around because it's their identity. Like your work title shouldn't be your identity. Like I am sure I'll find out some things about myself that I didn't realize by removing that, right? It becomes a crutch. So I think there's a lot of heavy psychological stuff that goes into this for founders, and it's worth discussing with people who've been down that road or made that decision, or decide, like, again, if are you doing the wrong thing? I mean, there's a company I know, and I just know that the founder's identity is super tied up in the business, and I think the business has been going sideways for years. And the best thing for that business, I think, for them to identify like that is not the right role.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm sure that's helpful for our CEO listeners here as well. And so, as we kind of close out our time together, I'm curious, what's next for you? Are you thinking about building another company? I hope there's a lot more Friday forwards, but curious, what else is on the horizon for you?
Yeah, and I'm not building another company. I'm doing some board work and some advisory work like that, because that sort of lets me do the stuff that I like to do, which is what's the crazy new idea and what's the strategy. So I've had some discussions around that. I'm just going to carve out some more time for my writing, and I'm very involved with AP. Like M&A is a big part of our strategy. I'm very busy, out recruiting, finding companies that match our thing, and we'll spend time working on, trying to convince them to work with us and integrate. So AP is still my number one priority. I think overall, I'm just pulling that throttle back from the 130% to, hey, I'm going to do all this stuff, but I'm going to do it in a 45-hour work week. And I'm not going to use nights and weekends to get all the extras done, because after 10 years of doing that, it was taking both a mental and a physical toll.
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining Conversations at the Edge today. It's a pleasure getting to hear your story, and a lot of really valuable lessons for our community. So appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Alex.
Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.